Hello and welcome back to a very special edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, October 11th. We have a really interesting program ahead. I think you're going to find it quite interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that are of concern to folks of the Millennial generation, folks who were born between roughly 1980 and 1995. And they are now coming into the mainstream of the political, economic, and social picture. And we want to hear what some of them are thinking about and some of their concerns, hopes, and things that are just sort of on their minds as we work our way forward through a rather confusing period in history, I think. We're all going to wind up looking back on this as. Anyway, it is great to be joined today in our virtual studio by Jonathan Cooper, who is the Community and Economic Development Specialist with the Bennington County Regional Commission. Sarah Lang is the Program Specialist with the Northern Border Regional Commission. Brenna Warren is the owner of Apex Wealth Management, a financial planning services firm based in Sunderland. And Stephanie Eames is the Partnership Liaison at the United Counseling Service in Bennington. Folks, thank you very much for making the time for this conversation today. Really appreciate that, and really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about what are some of these issues that are on your minds as we all move forward and hopefully on our way out, although you never know about the COVID pandemic. But anyway, let's go around our Zoom room here and hear what are some of the biggest issues that you feel are facing members of your generation. And Sarah, let's start with you. What is top of mind when you think about, things that are both of concern and both reasons for optimism?
Yeah, I think the things that give me the most headaches as a millennial would probably be housing and debt. That's from my personal experience, but also talking with lots of millennials. I used to run the young professionals group here. And so I had a lot of interesting conversations around many topics that millennials have to deal with, but specifically those two. I think in rural America, we are lacking in housing stock and also the price of housing, whether it's purchasing or renting. And then in more urban areas, I think the stock is there, but prices are skyrocketing. And obviously the pandemic has totally changed the game on housing. But I think that's a topic that we should touch on maybe a little more in depth here. And then the other thing is debt. I think growing up when we did, at least I didn't really understand debt. No one really taught me about it. You just sign the student loan form and away you go to college. And, here I am 12 years after undergrad, still paying my student loans. So, the announcement from the Biden administration was really excited. I was really excited to see. Again, I have to see it to believe it. So fingers crossed that it actually comes to fruition. But yeah, those would be my two topics.
Jonathan, let's go to you. What are some of the things that are top of mind for you?
Thanks, Andrew. There's a lot, but I do think that Sarah's comment earlier about wealth accumulation and sort of building equity in something and being able to, as an individual or as a household, family, demonstrate something compelling to a potential lender for a home loan, et cetera, is really, I think, a short-term, a real challenge, one that's a little bit it's a little deflating. And certainly in the midst of like a market free fall where we're seeing, retirement accounts, if we happen to have them, contracting, it's a little nerve wracking. But I would say that the thing that I think about the most, and this has a lot to do, I think, being on the older side of that millennial spectrum, and I have a 7-year-old and an almost 4-year-old at home, I think a lot about climate change. And I think a lot about not really being fully certain or knowing exactly which things are going to get messed with the most, which things are going to be more, we sort of have a sense of who's most vulnerable. But it's been fascinating to see, from a Vermont perspective, that when it comes to sort of a localized threat of climate change, we're in an area that is likely to not see as many of the most severe impacts as other parts of the United States, other parts of the world, which presents us with a bit of an opportunity for, what is Vermont going to look like in an era, being the only state in New England that doesn't have coastline, that there's probably something there that will be, in 50 or 60 years time, pretty significant. And I do think about what it is that I can do, and what sort of options we have as a family to give our kids options that might be more than just lifestyle choices when they're my age.
Yeah, well, that's a comment I hear often from my own kids as well. But we're going to dig down into that one for sure as we go on. But let me go to you, Brenna, for right now. What are some of the things that you think about as you look forward to the future?
Yeah, thanks. So I think regardless of what generation you're part of, right now, one of the things that is most top of mind for me and most frustrating is that we live in this world that we have the most access to information ever, but things are moving incredibly fast and it's very distracting. And as a business owner and a single mom, I kind of am looking at it from those perspectives. So from a business owner standpoint, it's keeping up with all of the things that are going on in the world and having accurate information, kind of touching on what Sarah said as a financial advisor. I mean, understanding that process and what's happening with student loan debt is incredibly important. As a Vermonter and a human, climate change is incredibly important. And as a mom, making sure that there's a lot of things happening in this world that I myself have a really hard time understanding why they're happening. And so being able to articulate that to my kids in a way that I'm not scaring them, but also helping them learn and really managing like my house and doing what I can on the individual household level as best I can from the position I'm in right now. I would say, I mean, it's none of the things you had listed, but really that is the thing that at this point in my life weighs heaviest on me is from a parent perspective, this world that my kids are entering into, making sure that I'm explaining it in a way that they can understand, preparing them for it in a way that they'll actually be able to handle it later on. And I myself am working through the various issues and really trying to understand where I stand on different things and have accurate information the whole way through. It's a really volatile, confusing time for anyone, regardless of the age you're at. But I feel like right now, it's kind of being in that point where my career is taking off, but at the same time, trying to manage two kids. I have a 9 and a 12-year-old. So that asks a lot of questions. So that's for me where I'm at.
Interesting. Yes, I can remember back when my kids were 9 and 12, and it was an interesting time. Well, Stephanie, let's go to you. What are some of the things that you're thinking about as we move forward?
One of my daily concerns is work-life balance. I think, as Jonathan pointed out, we are older millennials. We're starting to be sandwiched between caring for children and caring for aging parents who are starting to have health issues of their own, and they're in a transition stage, working on retirement, thinking about their next steps in life. So we're really supporting two generations right now, and for some of us, and with workplace shortages, we're also feeling the crunch and having to pick up the pace at work. So maintaining that work-life balance is really difficult. But there is a point of optimism, I think, that I would like to talk about today is that millennials are really breaking some generational cycles, especially when it comes to trauma. I've seen a lot of work in friends and families that I work with that they are creating better lives for their children.
Interesting. Well, that's another thing we'll definitely have to explore a little bit further. But let's talk about some of the things that you've mentioned here. And hard to know where to start here, but let me begin with one that I guess I find myself thinking a lot about, and that's the climate change piece. Jonathan, I think you mentioned that, but I'm sure we can all talk about that. I do find myself feeling like, wow, what is the world going to be like in another, 15 or 20 years if we kind of like keep going the way we're going, and progress seems to be so slow in terms of reducing things like carbon emissions. I guess, do you all feel like sort of impatient with the folks who are currently in positions of power and authority and theoretically in a position to kind of actually do something about it? Do you feel that they're just sort of kind of shrugging their shoulders about it all and thinking that, well, maybe it won't be all that bad, or we'll figure out a way to get through it, or it'll be somebody else's problem in 15 or 20 years, and what the heck, or is there some feeling that, well, they're trying, but it's complicated?
I think that the pressure to improve or change climate change for the better is being put on the wrong people. I think there's so much emphasis on, use, reusable bags and walk when you can and ride your bike and get an EV car. And, research has shown that that's not going to make a dent. It really isn't. Why it may make you feel good about like the way you're living your life, it's really the corporations that need to make the change. And so I think for me, I find it really frustrating that our people in power have not found a way to sort of break that mold and just say like enough is enough. It's less about like who's lobbying me and where I'm getting money, and more about like, is this earth going to be around in 100 years? And I don't know if we'll ever get to that point with our political system. But I do think, there's too much emphasis on what can the individual do and not enough on what the corporations can do to help switch the position we're in.
Do you all feel like just sort of helpless to kind of really kind of bring any leverage to bear on that? Or do you feel like or is it just sort of too hard to kind of organize people to kind of get some kind of collective action going that actually would bring more pressure to bear on, let's say fossil fuel industries or other corporations that are deeply, kind of involved in, the folks that are bringing you climate change?
Well, I appreciate Sarah's point. I think that's really a really good one, and it's super important that we sort of saddle it freighted with the individual, choices, and that's only leads to us being stressed out about walking around holding a yogurt cup that our kid finished eating while we were in the middle of a downtown. It's like, oh, where's the recycling one? I don't want to put it in the trash. That's bad. And, I do think that I'm going to have to defer immensely to the finance professional that's also in this meeting. But there is something that has been on my mind, and that is, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I think that our Department of Defense is thinking about this pretty deeply. And I think that there's a lot of institutions and corporations that would like to maybe be in front of any sort of market-based solution. Whether or not that's the best approach or not, I don't know. But we still have, quarterly earnings reports that they need to be accountable to stockholders. And this is a problem, and something that I would really value in our elected official class is, something that provides whatever cover needs to be provided, so that there is some wiggle room, and that, we're not in violation of the law in not attempting to maximize shareholder value while attempting to preserve shareholder existence, if we're going to speak roughly about it. But I don't, and to be honest, I am not an Elon Musk fan. I don't like that guy. But one thing that we have right now is an era when people are able to speak about whole systems, and it's not odd to think about mobilizing those whole systems for things besides war. And as a result, I wonder if, in fact, there is a little bit of creativity that might otherwise, creative thinking that might otherwise go by the boards, that could be part of this. I mean, I don't need to hear, commercial airliners talking about how green they are. Like we can all sort of filter that out with our jaded perspectives. But I do need to hear about what Exxon is thinking about, and what is Chevron and Shell? What do they have in mind? Because I bet it's not to die on that hill.
So Brenna, that sounds like a cue for you to weigh in here.
Yeah, I'll try not to sound too negative, I guess, for lack of a better word, in terms of my perspective on this. Jonathan's right in a lot of ways. I feel like a lot of the things that have been done up till now have been kind of poor attempts to incentivize what should be the right choice. And those incentives, when it comes to the corporate world, are always going to have ways to be worked around. I mean, if you really dig into the different, credits and how it works. There's so many ways that corporations can be green without at all making a single change to how they're actually doing business. So for me, as a single individual in Vermont, it's very hard to, put a lot of energy into thinking about what can I do to change this, because you just get feeling kind of hopeless on that level. And I think that none of that is ever going to like truly change until the people that are actually in those positions of power, and not just politicians, but actual corporations, are pressured from consumers to not just, greenwash everything, but actually be conscious of what are we doing to, this world, and how are we affecting it. Until the people really care about like actually doing that, the incentives don't matter, because the incentives are ways that they're going to figure out how to work around and still maintain being profitable. And there's nothing wrong with being profitable. You should. But I mean, when we think of our generation, and even my kids, listen to my kids talk and the things that they're aware of, it's like, this is what we actually care about. I'm much more apt to support a brand that actually is doing that. And so I think that if corporations really start to see that and lean into it, it'll be a slow change, but eventually we'll get there. And I guess that's my bit of optimism in my dialogue there. I don't think that, and as Sarah said, there's a lot of things I do at a household level. I understand that those aren't making a dent. There's still things that I want to model for my kids and for myself, and there's still things I think are important to do. And ultimately, one of the biggest issues I feel like with politics in general, and I have become very disillusioned when it comes to political systems and changes that are made, unfortunately, and really had to find peace of mind, just make choices to decide to live in a way that like I feel good about, and live in a way that like I'm raising children that I feel good about. And that's my way of convincing myself that I'm making an impact moving forward. Kind of the idea, just one more little tangent, and I'll stop ranting here, but the idea that we inherited this situation, it's not untrue, but it's also not true. It's not like there's a shift change. It's not like the boomers are done and now it's our turn. Even when you came and asked me if I would be part of this, I was like, am I still a millennial? And I do make the cutoff by a few years, but it's an ever-changing thing that's going to slow. I am guessing that the people that are on the older age of millennials don't feel the same as the people on the younger end, and the same with the boomers and whatever generation you're part of. So these changes happen slow, and they are passed down, and we need to be aware of that. I think it's going to be a really slow change, and it probably isn't going to keep up with the actual damaging things that are happening. But I think that's it is one of the more powerful things we can do, is, actually genuinely, earnestly believe in these things and find ways to show that to the businesses we interact with, to our kids, to the choices we make and how we live our lives.
Well, let's move on to a few of the other items here that you all mentioned, and I guess one thing I'm also kind of curious to hear about is how you feel the opportunities are for you to kind of grow professionally and advance professionally, and kind of realize some of the things you maybe wanted to do back when you were all in college or whatever, some of the dreams you might have had. Do you feel there's enough latitude out there where, you can kind of, become the person you wanted to be 10, 15 or whatever years ago? Or is the nature of the economic and political, and we maybe dial in the cultural aspects as well, just so, too limiting? I often have thought that, the timing of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009 came at a point when you all were just beginning to kind of, maybe enter the workforce and sort of begin to, move on. And that was probably something that really, kind of stymied things. I might have thought, but maybe that's not the case. But, Stephanie, let me turn to you here. Do you feel that you've been able to get the space that you need to kind of, do whatever it was you wanted to do?
Absolutely. I've been able to make a lot of shifts in my career. I started out as a teacher librarian at Long Trail School. That's what brought me to Southern Vermont to begin with. I'm not a Vermont native. And after a while, once I had children, it no longer became the right position for me anymore. And I was able to make a shift. And for some time, I ran my own business as a freelance information professional. And so I was able to have that work-life balance when my children were very young. I was able to work with BCRC for a time, doing their internship program. And then I was able to shift more into human services where I am now. So I'm really interested in working with especially families with young children. So I feel like there's enough opportunity in Southern Vermont to follow your passions and to see where your career leads you.
And how about the rest of you? Do you all feel that same way, or?
I think that, well, one, I am nowhere where I thought I would be 15 years ago. So there's that. Would have never pictured myself here doing what I'm doing, but I guess that's the exciting thing about life. But I would say that, silver lining with the pandemic, with more jobs offering remote work, I think has opened up sort of the opportunities for living in rural Vermont. I think there have been, I just changed jobs recently. I'm only 6 months new at my current position. And, it wasn't a quick turnaround by any means for finding and accepting a new position. So it did take a bit. But I would say something that I found specific to here and probably other rural areas is that a lot of the organizations tend to be small, and climbing the ladder is not really a thing. There's organizations with 2, 3, 4 people, very flat organizations. And so sort of if you're looking for that, gradual climb in compensation and responsibility, I feel like there aren't sort of those baby steps. It's like, there's sort of bigger leaps and then it stops. And so, like I said, the remote work has been great in opening opportunities, but I definitely don't see as much as, if we were maybe in a more populated area. But, it's the cost benefit of choosing to live in an area like this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I agree. I think that there's definitely some limitations in terms of if you want to work for a larger corporation or something here within Vermont. But I also think it's amazing how much entrepreneurship there is here. And I think that's a huge just area of possibility for so many people that are willing to take that leap. I worked for a great company for 11 years and they were wonderful, but taking that leap has allowed me to do what I actually want to do. And whether it was partly just the fact that it's 2022 or the fact that we just went through the pandemic and we've had this disruption where we're just much more comfortable doing things online, I think it opens up a lot more ability to whatever it is that you do, be able to do it from Vermont, from where you want to actually live. I have clients in something like 13, 14 states right now. I see them via Zoom for the most part, the ones that aren't right here, and it works fine. And so, that wasn't necessarily a possibility 20 years ago in the same capacity. And that's something that's really opened up a lot.
There's it was about 1996 when I realized that I didn't have much of a future as a professional hockey player. That was a tough one. And it was about 2006 that I realized I didn't have much of a future as being at the forefront of what I was certain would be the, revitalization of the psychedelic garage rock scene between Boston and New York City. Didn't work out that way. But by 2016, I knew that I did want to be working in rural New England in community and economic development. Now, I felt like I lost about 5 or more years to the pandemic. It really felt like it just set me back. I had to make some workarounds, which included going back to graduate school. and then in that respect, I have a Vermont story. The first place I lived in Vermont was in Waterbury, and there was a local energy action sort of group that was conducting a lot of, back in 2009, 2010, a lot of efficiency activity was going on there. And eventually they got funding from the state to fund an 8-hour-a-week position. And I've been sort of hanging out, working for moving companies, doing, odd stuff, this, that, and the other. I was like, oh, well, there's something I can do. I know the people, maybe a good fit. And the position, such as it was, 0.2 FTE, went to someone with about 30 years of experience in energy efficiency work. And I was like, man, I got to get out of the state. Which of these doors opens? And so it was triumphantly that I returned to Bennington, so a bit farther south, in 2016. But it does feel like having gotten here, I sense, I see a lot of opportunity to participate. A lot of interest in our voices. People are asking my wife to be a part of things, for me to be a part of things. And if we want to take one or two steps towards something, those things come running to us. And that's been, that's an exciting thing. And I do think, looping back to that climate change shift, I can see a lot of people moving to this area. And so for now, I'll get in while the talent bar is low. But if it's the case that in a couple of years' time, like there's a real influx of people, we may, the hope is that one of the things that's valuable about this place, and that is, for me, the culture of involvement in civic matters and public matters, and your life isn't your 9 to 5, and it isn't just what you do between 5 o'clock and bedtime. There's ways in which you are connected to the towns that you live in, the villages that you live in. That's an exciting thing for me, and I feel like that is very much the kind of connection that I wanted when I was growing up in a suburb of Boston. I didn't quite know how to articulate it when I was 13 or 15 years old, but when I came to Bennington and I began to work with the Regional Planning Commission, I was like, that's it. That's what I was looking for, and that's something that I'm really grateful for every day.
Mm. Well, if it makes you feel any better, Jonathan, my plans for what I was going to be doing sometime in the mid-1970s was playing center field for the New York Yankees. But for some reason, still mysterious to me, that didn't happen. But anyway, we moved on. There's so many points to talk about here and to get to. I want to go back to something, Sarah, you mentioned when you got us started here in talking about housing. With the election coming up, I'm talking to an awful lot of politicians, both local and state. And of course, the whole housing issue is the first thing they all want to talk about for understandable reasons. So does the prospect of not ever being able to own a home or having that cost so much more than, let's say, someone who was looking for a home 20, 30, 40 years ago might have been spending? And of course, now we're seeing interest rates going up. So, that's even more elusive than it might have been even a couple of years ago. But how big of a question for folks of your generation is this whole housing thing? Is it, the whole idea of having a home in the suburbs and behind a white picket fence, is that still like a big deal? Or is it kind of, yeah, but, I want a house, but not maybe necessarily that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually have never bought a home because I married into one. So I've never had to personally go through that process. So I kind of lucked out in that regard. I think the focus for, I guess, anywhere in the US, but specifically here in our state, really needs to be on diversity of housing. I think, to your point, we're sort of leaning away from that suburb white picket fence ideal. Although some, millennials probably want that, and that's fine. But I think there's a bigger diversity of what millennials are interested in as far as housing. And I think in Vermont, we're seriously lacking those choices. And I think if we are expecting or wanting more younger people to move here, we can't expect them to, be happy with their choices, which are, lacking in our area. And so I think, and there are millennials who never want to own a home. And I think that's fine too. But I think it really comes down to diversity of stock, diversity of types of housing, diversity in cost, to really sort of be available for all the different types of wants and needs that we're seeing in our generation.
Any of the rest of you want to weigh in on that before we move on? Well, housing was
coming to mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
One thing coming to mind too is housing insecurity as far as being sufficiently housed at the time, but maybe always being on the edge of being pushed out of that housing. Maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're not sure if you're going to make rent that month. And that goes back to Jonathan's point at the beginning about wealth security for our generation. Many millennials are not able to save. The money's coming in, it's going straight out, and most of it's going to housing, and it's not to sufficient housing usually.
Just real quick on that, kind of an extension of what you just mentioned is really interesting. I think we all recognize that one thing the pandemic did is widen the gap between people that were struggling and people that were comfortable to put it in broad categories. And it's really interesting. I work with all different ages, but I have a lot of clients that are in the millennial group, and I have a lot of clients that are at or in like really close or in retirement. And those people are pretty much fine. Like the pandemic didn't really negatively affect them. But the people that are on the younger end, especially if they were trying hard and they were planning decent jobs, but maybe hadn't gotten ahead yet, it really knocked them back. And even those that aren't looking for housing at this point are struggling more, but those that are, it's a whole, the supply is ridiculously low at this point, whether it's you're looking for an apartment or you're looking to buy a house. It's constantly when I have somebody that will come in, they'll say, have you heard anything? Because I'm looking to rent and there's literally nothing out there. And so, a lot of things that are available are going, friend of a friend of a friend told me. It's not this market that you can anyone can go in and look at and say, oh, okay, well, this is an apartment that might fit my needs. And that's kind of a scary prospect. I am a homeowner and so it's, not something that I had to experience, but I have had to have the empathy of navigating that situation with clients, and it's scary.
I'll add to that. One of the things that's it's really worth remembering, as I try to bear it in mind as much as I can, is that earlier in the pandemic and in other moments when federal assistance has hit individual taxpayers, the questions always, what's going to happen? What are people going to do with their money, et cetera? And it was like people who were millennials were paying off credit card debt. Like they were doing the right things with the funds. Like people weren't, it's a pandemic, you can't go to like Acapulco, but the point is that there was just, people were really making the kinds of steps that, Dave Ramsey would tell you, that's what you got to do. And that tells us something. And not just that people are not profligate with their spending, but also it tells us that people are in positions where they have something they have to take care of before they can do these other things. And our system works great if you never fall behind, if you never aren't in the next step when you're supposed to be in the next step. And if anything happens, it's years and years and years. And that's something that I think a lot of Americans already knew, and they've known for generations. And part of what we have to bear in mind is that this maybe is something that many of us are experiencing for the first time. But the notion that a system isn't working, the notion that it doesn't want you to get ahead, that you already are in the group that shouldn't get ahead, so good luck getting out of that group. But which is, as I say, is not new to many Americans, but it's something that I do think is really at play here, that we've sort of seen, well, what's going to happen if people are given resources? And the fact is, millennials were doing prudent things, you might say, fiscally. And one thing that has come up that's kind of interesting is that where there is home ownership, perhaps people that jumped in on something before the rates went up, it's like, okay, those are your golden handcuffs, because now the rates are higher. How are you going to move from there, from the starter home to the growing family home, when the leverage you have now is far diminished from the leverage that you had then? And in any event, there's many ways in which these things are one. Sometimes it's like, well, this is just a cycle. You're just in a cycle. Don't panic. Cycles are cycles. But then there's also a component where it's people are less prepared for the cyclical nature of these cycles than perhaps we had been able to withstand before, which makes it tying for me things about climate change, et cetera. We're in a period of time where there's a little less resilience on all fronts to the things that may befall us, and that's demoralizing sometimes.
Let me ask you another question. Since we do have an election coming up in less than a month or so, about the political system. I mean, it's pretty typical to say nowadays we live in a very divisive, polarized time, and political engagement is sometimes difficult. I guess I just wonder, do you feel that politicians in general listen to you, that they're concerned about what you're concerned about, and kind of related to that? What is your sense of how other members of your generation are feeling about voting? Do you feel like they feel like their vote is important, that it's really, that's a important thing to do, or is it like, these guys, they don't care about me, and what's my one vote doesn't matter anyhow? I guess I just wondered, kind of what your thoughts are and how you feel the political system is responding to some of the concerns that you've mentioned here in the last half hour or so. Well, let's see.
Well, I do have some thoughts. I mean, this is a state where there is one House rep for every 4,300 people.
Something like that, yeah.
They listen to all of us because there's a lot for the size of the state that we have. And so from a Vermont perspective, absolutely. I think that it is completely the case. We know who they are, and they have to see all of us at the grocery store, hanging out, car wash, wherever. You cross paths with your elected officials. And I sort of made a joke the other day. It's like, oh, you'll be, move to Vermont and you'll be hosting a podcast with Bill McKibben by the end of the year. And it really does feel like that's true to me. I think, but at a broader national level, I think one of the things that's nice about being just like everybody else in America in a place that's, 2% of the Senate. Yeah. People are accessible. They're available. There's much more likelihood here than in many other parts of the country that not just that you'll be heard, that you'll be known. That maybe that's just, a little bit of the Norman Rockwell Kool-Aid talking here, but it feels like something that's actually true. I don't know, where the limits of political power are. That's sort of a separate question for me. But in this instance, it seems like if there's something that I think needs to be said, my goodness, just by dint of living here, I can think of maybe 6 or 7 or 8 people that I could say that to, that would call back if I left a voicemail. And that's a very heartening thing. And I don't know how I'd feel if I was living in California or Texas or states with gigantic populations. I would feel completely differently about this. But in the one that I live in, that is how I feel.
And
Yeah, I would say,
that way? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say piggybacking off of that, moving to Vermont, I sort of had the realization of how important local politics really are even on the national stage. And to Jonathan's point, you are running into these people, they have to answer to you unless you see them scurrying away down the, baking aisle, you probably know where they live. Or their home phone number. And I think there is power in that. And I think by choosing and electing the right people at your local level, it tends to have a ripple effect Obviously, maybe the effect gets less and less as it gets higher and higher towards DC, but I think we really shouldn't discount voting in local elections. And I think growing up, at least for me, that was never talked about. It was always like, you're voting for the president, like that's all you vote for. And I would say in the last 5 years, like I've really seen the importance of like voting for your select board members and voting for your state reps and state senators, and how just those things have a huge impact on your daily life. And, my hope is that more people are seeing how important those elections are, and really focusing, if they're going to focus only on a few elections or one election, like really the local elections, I feel impact my daily life more than maybe the national ones.
Okay. A couple of other things I'm dying to ask you all about. One of them is social media. Someone who came to the social media game late, shall we say, to put it politely, I find myself increasingly going, "Oh my God, this stuff is crazy." I find myself using it less and less. But I guess I just find myself wondering, what do you all think about it? Is it on balance, a net positive, or is it so problematic that you want to go, "Yikes, I got to be careful," or is it just sort of it's just one more way to communicate with people, and it's kind of a good way to kind of stay in touch with folks. Stephanie, let me start with you on that one. Do you feel like on the whole it's a good, bad, or indifferent kind of feature to modern life?
Feel pretty neutral about it. I think that it's there as part of my daily life, and I don't think about it too much. But when you stop thinking about social media, it can start to take over. So I think that you have to approach it critically, and think about, why are you using it and how are you using it? Take a step back every once in a while and assess all your feeds and make sure that you're getting a diversity of opinions, and that you're using it to connect with the people that you want to connect with.
Well, there's certainly a lot of useful aspects to it, and then every now and then I think, "Gee, too bad we didn't stop at the fax machine." But I guess we're not going to uninvent it now, are we?
But Andrew, there's many penny stocks that you should be investing in, right? I mean,
right. Yeah.
I would add to that. I think Stephanie's. I can't wait to watch the broadcast of this so I can make a record of what Stephanie just said, because that was the most sensible thing about social media that I can recall hearing in the last 15 years. I'd sort of have wondered if people might have okay, it's a thing you do for 10 to 15 years and then you outgrow it or you move beyond it, but I don't quite know that. I mean, I'm from the time of Friendster. So there's, it's been around me for a little while, but it is the case that, I know how important that is as a communication tool among, many people that are, for the boards that I sit on, et cetera, where it's this is how we get people to go to things, to uptake resources, et cetera. And that's super important. I think that in some ways it would be nice if, we kind of, if it were back to the way it was, but then again, like as Stephanie said, there's, if things are in the way, then they don't need to be in the way. But if we put it on in the background, then it, all of a sudden it's like a music service that doesn't quite know you too well. All of a sudden you're listening to stuff that it just sort of expands a little bit. And so it does require a little diligence. And certainly if any encouragement that we have to behave appropriately in the public realm is probably not such a bad thing.
All right. Well, that sounds good. So we're getting near the end of our time slot here, but there is one point that I wanted to go back to. A couple of you raised near the start of our conversation here, and that's this question around work-life balance. I mean, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people, leaving their jobs. I mean, some of them also were shown the door by their employers, I guess, as their businesses tried to adjust to the pandemic. But a lot of people decided that was a moment to kind of rethink their career track or what they were doing. The Great Resignation, I believe, is one of the terms that's been applied to it. But I guess I just wondered, do you all feel, and Stephanie, let me go back to you here because I think I recall you saying this when we first began. Do you feel life today gives you the opportunity to have a good balance between work and recreation and doing other things that you want to do?
I don't feel balanced at all. I feel pulled in a million different directions right now. It's it, I often feel like I am not quite good enough in a lot of the different areas of my life. So some days I feel like I'm not quite good enough at my job, or some days I feel like I'm not quite good enough at being a mother. You don't have the opportunity to perfect anything, certainly, and so that can make you doubt yourself. And there's just so much going on. There's so much to be involved with, and I think especially now we're in this point in the pandemic where everything's opening up, and there's this pressure to get involved again, to see all the people, to do all the things, and we're loading up our schedules again, and it feels unsustainable to me.
Do the rest of you feel that way?
Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, you go, Brenda.
I was just going to say, I personally feel like for the first time in a really long time, I don't like the word balance, but I feel like I'm spending the amount of time doing the things I want to do. And balance doesn't necessarily mean, equal parts. In my world, it just means having the freedom and flexibility without everything coming crashing down to allow that pendulum to swing to the area you need to focus on at that point in your life. And some of that is certainly now owning my own business where I'm not accountable to anyone but myself and my clients. And, if I can get the work done, then it doesn't matter what hour I get that done. So that does certainly allow for some more flexibility that I didn't used to have. And that is a beautiful thing. As a hardworking mom of two, I don't need to worry about my own commitment to get the job done. It's really nice to have the ability to, coach my son's baseball team and make it to every, school event at 10:45 in the morning and things like that, So I would say at this point in my life, while I still feel exactly like Stephanie said, that I do a lot of things not really well. And I really wish I could become really good at any of those. And I know I could be if I actually have the time to commit to them. It's just not the stage of life that I feel like, especially if you have children as an older millennial, your career is probably pretty well established and you're, growing in that capacity, raising young people and balancing, probably a handful of other commitments, boards and things like that. And that's okay. I understand it's a little crazy and I'm not going to become a master at any of the things I want to become a master at the moment. And that's okay. But I do feel like I'm at a point that the pandemic kind of forced this tactical pause to reassess our lives and our situations and say, okay, what is important to me? And I really realized that, I was okay making a little less money if it meant a little more time with the kids, if it meant a little more flexibility. And, ultimately, maybe that's not even a choice I have to make, but it was certainly something that became very clear in that moment of taking a step back. So I'm personally feeling like my career is in a good place. I'm more connected with my kids, and I'm really happy with the balance or lack of balance that exists right now in my life.
Yeah, I would add on that the pandemic definitely made me question work-life balance, and that was the biggest reason why I made a job change, and it's been amazing. Honestly, my life seems just so much less stressful, and I feel like I have more time to do things that are not related to work, which I really didn't have in my previous situation. And so I feel like my life is a lot more balanced in that I'm able to do a lot of different things that a sort of heavy work side of things didn't allow. And I also think I've been seeing a lot of people in our generation just become more like self-aware. And, sort of back to what Stephanie was saying about breaking sort of the trauma cycles. I think I've seen a lot of our generation doing the work to understand sort of who they are and why they are the way they are, and putting up the boundaries to protect themselves and protect their mental health. And that, I think, comes with the work-life balance situation is even though, I've been asked to be on 3 boards within the past month, I've said no to all of them because I realize that I cherish sort of this situation that I am in now. And, knowing that I can say yes at any point, I can change my mind if a spot opens up.
And it really feels like a thing that, in addition to work-life balance, which I'd like to speak to in just a moment, there's also, I think, the kinds of conversations that are happening now with what Stephanie shared and with what Brenna shared. It's like it feels good to feel fluent in that conversation. Like we're talking about this, and it's something that we're able to discuss openly, and it gives us a chance to feel like I know that feeling, or that sounds amazing, and I'm happy that that's something that is part of life now, And I was thinking about my 0.7 mile commute. I can't get a lot of thinking done on that commute, but I can think about it a lot. And it's, my parents had to drive about an hour for their jobs, and their jobs paid better than mine does. But then it's like, but I have this time. However, like, am I ready to be the parent that I'd like to be in this time? Am I ready to, is this time when I have the sort of, I guess the spoons or the buckets or whatever the sort of imagery is for being fully present. And, that's been something that's, I think, one thing that's been valuable about being at this age stage now in this current climate is that people are thinking about that, and they're open to talking about it, and they're open to putting that kind of thing a little closer to the front of the picture or right at the front of the picture. And I think people and employers, et cetera, are as accommodating as can possibly be about that. And that's something that feels really good. And I know that one of the things that I have sort of had to learn is that it is not 1992 anymore. It is not 1997 anymore. And I'm coming home from work thinking about it, just thinking about it, always thinking about it. And during the pandemic, one of the things I guess I spent maybe a year and a half doing was thinking about it all the time. And it's been something that I've been thinking about lately is, how do I stop thinking about it? And can I figure out how to not be someone who's always thinking about it or thinks that, I forgot this one thing, I should send one more email. It's like, man, it's 8:45 at night and you're trying to watch the Patriots or the Bruins. You can do that and not write the email. But I've been surprised at how hard it's been to quiet that like workhorse voice down. And I'm, especially because like, I don't know why this needs to happen right now, but that's something where, in hearing some of the conversation that's sort of come up and answer this question from Sarah, Brenna, Stephanie, and myself, I think that it's really great that it's the sort of thing that we can all hear a little bit of ourselves in, no matter what it is that we say.
Well, really fascinating. So we have time for like one little lightning round of quick questions before we have to run here. I guess I just thought in general, and I'm not sure if this is something you can answer adequately in 1 minute or less, but let's give this a try. In general, do you feel like, there's grounds for optimism moving forward, and that there's basis for some positive feelings about what the future does hold? I mean, despite the prospect of a recession, despite all the uncertainty in Ukraine, the pandemic, all the other things we've talked about, do you feel, hey, we're going to be okay somehow or another? This is going to work out, or how do you feel respond to that? And we'll start at the beginning with Sarah again. Do you think that there is, all things considered, hey, it'll be okay?
Yes. I think adversity breeds creativity and entrepreneurship and new ideas and new ways of doing things. And so even though our generation has been sort of put through the ringer on a lot of topics, I will say it has, I think, shown that our generation is really resilient and creative and entrepreneurial. And we can find our way around sort of these tough nuts to crack and still enjoy our daily life.
Okay. Brenna, over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm incredibly optimistic at this point. I feel like, at the stage of life that I'm personally at, I've certainly worked through a lot of struggles and come out the other side where like the things that I'm dealing with now just feel like not as big a deal as the things I dealt with in the past. And I know I made it through. I feel like there is a ton of opportunity and just possibility for people no matter what life throws at them right now. And I always maintain the perspective as everything. So as soon as that perspective changes, I think your world changes. So, maintaining that really optimistic point of view is important. I think we're in a world where the rules unfortunately are always changing. And that's something that I'm kind of struggling with right now in terms of everything from the student loan debt payoff and the dialogues I always had with clients before that recent announcement, was we're not ever going to count on that. We're going to create a plan, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, now this looks like this is going to be a real thing. All right, let's adjust. And that's one tiny thing, but I feel like the rules in the world right now are changing. But we have every tool we need. We have everything we need at this point to address those and thrive in whatever environment it is. And there's something super empowering about that. So personally, I'm pretty optimistic right now.
Okay, Stephanie, over to you. What's your feeling?
I'm optimistic too, because I see so many people of all generations locally working hard to make our community a better place. And I think I tune out a lot of the national stuff and I focus on what's happening locally to find my source of optimism. And I think if you look around Bennington and surrounding areas, you can see a lot of people of all generations working hard to make this a good community for people to work and live.
And Jonathan, you get the last word.
Well, the thought is, I'll hand a little bit of it to Steve and John, who's a member of the Deerfield Valley DV Fiber Communications Union District. And his emails have always concluded, he's a former educator, with the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And that's really, really true. And I think that, 1950 looked different from 1980, looked different from 2010, looked different from 1920, from 1890. They've all, everything has looked different. Give it 30 or 40 years. We really haven't had that kind of climax community forest that we all learned about when we were kids, where things just get to a certain area and they stop. So I feel really optimistic for the future because we're all, we're going to be here and it's going to happen and it's always going to be now. And that now we'll have, people in it and we'll have challenges and we'll still be people. And that's, it'll look different, but that was a given from the get-go. So whatever it is, it's an adaptable species. And if it weren't, it wouldn't be but the Arctic Circle and it wouldn't be over in Australia. I mean, it's an adaptable species and I'm glad to be a part of it. But that whole may you live in interesting times thing you get in a fortune cookie, that's, the kind of the joke is that they're all interesting times and this one's ours.
Yeah, well, in 1960 sure were interesting. It seemed like it anyway, but that's part of the history books now. Well, hey guys, thank you so much again for making the time for this. This has really been fun. Really interesting to me to kind of hear your perspectives on all of this, and I've been flashing back in time as we've been talking here. But anyway, I want to thank again Jonathan Cooper, Sarah Lang, Brenna Warren, Stephanie Eames. Really great to have you on our program today, and I'm sure for all the folks who are watching, they certainly got to hear some of your perspective, which is really important because you guys are going to be the ones who are going to be in charge of stuff in a few years when people like me move finally off the picture and off to the cow pasture or wherever it is I'm supposed to go. So good luck out there. Anyway, thanks again, and thanks to all of you who've been with us and watching. I hope you found our program interesting. And well, we'll see you the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day.